Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to Efficiency Canada's bi-weekly discovery webinar. If you don't know me, I'm James Gady. I'm the Director of Research at Efficiency Canada, and I am pleased today to host this discovery session. Just to get started, I'm based in Waterloo in Southern Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people. And if you're not familiar with Discovery, let me tell you a little bit about Discovery. So, Discovery is a bi-weekly webinar series that Efficiency Canada has been hosting for several years now. The sessions are intended to bring together the energy efficiency sector as well as people that are interested in energy efficiency, with the hope that we can all learn together and highlight new research and findings from pilots and studies and other relevant topics, innovations in the energy efficiency sector. So today we're joined by Josh Kelly, who is Engineering Director, Climate Platform at ICLEI Canada. And Josh is going to present on the Climate Insight Resource Center for Community Planning and Infrastructure Practitioners. The Climate Insight Resource Center provides insight on building low carbon and resilient communities. And with that, Josh, I'll turn it over to you and we'll get going.
Thanks, everybody. Assuming you can hear me, I'm Josh Kelly, Engineering Director with ICLEI Canada. As you heard, I am located in Prince George, in the traditional territory of the Lheidli T'enneh, but the work of ICLEI Canada does happen across Turtle Island. Yeah, so I do have a quick presentation to run through just to set the stage, and then fingers crossed, a live demo of the Climate Insight website. So yeah, bear with me here while I share some screens and we get this going. So there. Okay, looks good. Hopefully we're sharing the right screen here. Anybody pop in and tell me if I've got the presenter view up, but we're going to get rolling. Climate Insight. If you want to look along with me, that'd be great. While I'm going through the slides, it's climateinsight.ca. Yeah, and we're here to give a brief overview. The quick spiel, I guess the Climate Insight's the go-to online destination for relevant, actionable information for building climate-ready public infrastructure and housing. Okay, let's move that. So it's designed to help users understand climate risks and emissions in your communities and find solutions for the increasing risks and challenges associated with the changing climate, housing, and infrastructure. This is a collaboration between Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada and is funded in part by the Government of Canada. Next slide, please. There we go. So a few main features, three main features that we'll walk through in a second. I got a couple intro notes about each of them here, but we have a map that includes proxy data for climate hazards, socioeconomic vulnerability information, and infrastructure data. As much as those are available from public data sets, we've combined all that stuff, made it available on one map. The Solutions Finder, so it's probably one of the main or like flagship features about the site. And yeah, so you answer a series of questions to receive solutions for low carbon resilient infrastructure and really tailored to your needs. And then we've got a library. So it includes other resources, tools, case studies, codes and standards that are relevant to that topic. And really all of these things are meant to bring together information and research that can feel a little bit overwhelming if you just go out and do a Google search. So just a little bit more detail. Here's a quick view of the map. Yeah, we've got the climate information. So there's 3 climate periods, and we're using SSP5 8.5 for our climate info, the 50th percentile. I'll get into this a little bit more later on, but we have deliberately chosen to only include one scenario and one percentile just for simplicity at this moment. So if any users are actually conducting proper risk assessment, it's important to go and look at other sources of data like climatedata.ca. We're not trying to recreate that wheel, but just having one snapshot. We've also included a social vulnerability index, which is derived or is the StatsCan CIMD. There's information about that online and on the data sources page on Climate Insight. So you can look at that as well. But one of the really cool tools is that you can combine the two. So you can look at areas that are both increasing risks of hazards due to climate change and are already susceptible from a social vulnerability perspective, and also include infrastructure. Really, the idea of this or overlaying these three layers is to kind of look at areas that are high hazard for climate risks, already vulnerable from a social perspective, and may have critical infrastructure to help guide some decisions. The next one, the solutions finder, we'll definitely walk through this once I get onto the demo, but like I said before, you answer a series of questions about your community and about the project that you're working on or want to work on, and it produces a list of curated or filtered infrastructure options to help address whatever problem or whatever infrastructure project that you're working on. The last piece, the resource, the library. So again, it just helps to do a bunch of that research that can feel a little bit overwhelming if you're just diving into a project. Like, where do I get information? Where, which is relevant to my specific case? So it goes through and you can filter, sort, and look at those different resources by asset type, by hazard. The climate consideration, which isn't open at the moment, is the adaptation and mitigation. So it helps to filter through some of those things to get a quick look at resources. Okay, just about done talking here. So the bigger picture, we had a really cool opportunity here with our work with HICC to put out the product or the website before it was 100% as we'd want it to be. So we've just launched in October the first release of Climate Insight. And we're on like a 4-year journey to build and improve the site with user feedback. So it's really cool. We've got another release coming out at the end of April, so just a few weeks away. Unfortunately, what you're looking at right now is going to be outdated in a few weeks, but very much encourage you to have a look after April 24th and see what's new with the second release. You can also follow Climate Insight on LinkedIn, and there is a mailing list as well if you want to get news on those updates. We're also part of a larger ecosystem of tools. It's called the Climate Toolkit for Housing and Infrastructure. It's delivered through Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, HICC. So we're the one-to-many solution. The HICC also has a help desk to support communities with additional kind of one-on-one information. And there's also the Climate Ready Infrastructure Service, which pairs communities with experts to move their project forward. So because user feedback is very much at the heart of what we're doing here, very much encourage everybody to have a look, and you follow along while I'm clicking through in the live demo here, but climateinsight.ca is where we're headed for the site. And reach out. So if you're interested in learning more information or having a one-on-one demo specific for your community or your whatever you're working on, contact us. info@climateinsight.ca. And the last bit, I know I'm doing the wrap up things now, but we're going to finish the slides and get into the demo here in a second. I think maybe we have the link to the survey popping up in the chat, or the feedback survey popping up at the end of the presentation. But if anyone's got your phone handy, feel free to scan the QR code and you leave us a little bit of feedback or suggestions at the end of the presentation. And with that, I am done with the presentation portion. And let me just back out of this. And we will start having a look at the site. This one. Cool. I'm going to hope that everyone can still see this. I can still see you. So here it is, climateinsight.ca. So from the homepage, there's those three kind of main tools that I mentioned: the library, the map, and the solutions finder, or getting guided assistance on your project. So I will have a quick fly through the map so you can have a look, and then we'll jump into a couple runs through the solutions finder here. James said he was in Waterloo, so let's start with that. So there's the map. It defaults to the social vulnerability index for the area, and we've got some infrastructure layers on right now. So days with maximum temperature, just the next thing down the list there, and you can see, hopefully we're on the baseline period right now, mid-century, 2040 to 2070. And hopefully we'll see some colors change with that. So you can see that according to the climate data, days with maximum temperature in Waterloo are increasing as we get to that mid-century period and increasing again. Lots of red on that one. So I hope you've got air conditioning, James. Okay. And then, like I said before, combining those things with the equity information helps to see those areas that are also are vulnerable to climate hazards as well as some social vulnerability. And we can overlay some infrastructure with that. So maybe pedestrian and cycling information isn't all that important for, or I guess the project that you're looking at for extreme heat. Maybe it's your water system. It looks like we've got lots of water pipes on the map for Waterloo, but that's the idea with the map. I am in Prince George, I said, so we can just fly over there and see what it looks like. So definitely further north, not quite as much risk from the, or not quite as many, or not quite as large an increase, I guess, on those warm days. So yeah, that's the map. Happy to answer some questions about that, but down the road, or I guess in the question period. But this is really where I'd like to spend the rest of my time, walking through the solutions finder for a couple of things here. Just a few basic questions. Where are you? How big is your community? Prince George is about 75,000 people. So say you're new to this, an infrastructure professional that wants to start considering taking into account climate change into their work, or a climate change practitioner that is looking to understand a little bit more about those impacts and opportunities to enhance infrastructure projects in their community. So if I'm just starting out, maybe I want to learn a little bit more. So we do have a few resources here about understanding climate risks, emissions, equity, costs, and nature-based solutions in your projects. So yeah, clicking on any one of these just props up some additional resources that can help you walk through or understand what a climate change risk assessment is. There's some information about data, and somewhere on here, there is a search for risk assessment tools. So this is similar to the solutions finder that we'll walk through, but it helps provide a curated list of tools to support your risk assessment. Because again, there's lots of different tools out there to do this. Climate Insight is meant to help distill all that research and provide a quick way to access tools and infrastructure options that are applicable to your community. So I'll jump back here, and in the last few minutes I've got for presentation time, we'll walk through a couple infrastructure examples. I'm just going to stick with Prince George and say that I understand a little bit about the hazards and emissions in my community, and I want to address those in some way. So again, this is remote. I guess Prince George is probably the built up city and town in northern BC, so it probably doesn't apply to us. Northern's really focused on permafrost conditions, so I'm going to skip those for now, but whatever makes sense for your community. And in my first example, let's do mitigation. So we're looking to reduce our net emissions or our greenhouse gas emissions from some community infrastructure. And let's say, I don't know, buildings is a pretty easy one to pick on. So we'll do that. And I'm looking to reduce GHG emissions for existing buildings. And then you start getting into some of the project questions. So what kind of work are we doing here? Is this a major retrofit? Is this a moderate retrofit? Or are you just doing a few small changes? For my example, I'm thinking it's a moderate retrofit. We're maybe just doing some redesign of the HVAC system and replacing windows. So let's see what that turns up. Usable space. This asks like, where can you put new infrastructure for your project? So I don't know, we've got an existing building. So let's say I don't have any allocated space. What type of thing are you doing? So there's lots of different ways to mitigate emissions, energy efficiency, conservation, fuel switching, reducing non-energy emissions. So that would be like fugitive methane or refrigerants, or improving sequestration. I'm going to stick with my building example here. And I'm thinking if we're working on the HVAC equipment, let's try and fuel switch. Maybe we've got an old boiler or something that we want to update. Oh, that was a bad example. So let's try energy efficiency. Okay, there we go. So we got a few things that help with energy efficiency: improving your doors, enhancing the heating cooling system. There's HVAC. So these are our infrastructure options. It helps whittle down. There's what, 150 or so options in the site as a whole right now. And going through that list of questions helps to pare that down. So we had 15 results in this search. And these options, they give a really high level overview of what the solution is, what it does, how it works, things that you should consider, some additional information about what the option is, and some interesting information about trade-offs, co-benefits down here, EDI, and feasibility. So encourage everyone to have a click through on that. And if there's case studies on the site or codes and standards that relate to your specific option. So it helps bring a lot of that information together into one place. Just to touch on that no results page that I hit, we are constantly adding new content. There's a large chunk of new infrastructure options that are coming with the second release in April. And we do have new content coming almost every month in between those major releases. I'm going to step through one more example in the last few minutes here for an adaptation option, and then we'll open it up for questions. And happy to, if there are questions about a specific example that someone wants to walk through, I'm very happy to do that. It's always interesting to hear what people are doing and how the site can help with specific projects. So this time we're going to look at adaptation. And let's see, wildfire is one of the main hazards in Prince George, so we're going to want to do that. And let's say asset damage. So that's really if fire gets into the community and we want to protect some of our assets from that hazard. What should we do? How about water, wastewater, and our potable water infrastructure, drinking water? Let's, just because it's different this time, say we're building a new, I guess, well and water network for a community that's not, or a subdivision or some part of Prince George that isn't currently connected to the water network. So we're going to say new build. And there we go. This produces a list of things that we can do to address the wildfire risk for our infrastructure. So there's a variety of different things here. Non-combustible fencing is a pretty generic one to maybe protect the asset, like for the pump station or the well. Those things there usually have protection from access, and one thing that you can do to make sure fires don't come into that area. Yeah. So encourage everybody. It's tough to walk through all of this in even 15 minutes, but that's the high level view. So the solutions finder is very much one of those, I'd say the flagship or keystone resource for climate insight. The map to help situate users on what they're dealing with in their community. The library for those other resources. The Learn page I touched on briefly was where you can understand more about those impacts, and the support page. So I mentioned during the presentation about the Climate Help Desk to get some answers to some of your specific questions. And then the expert support is the climate ready infrastructure service that pairs communities with professionals. So a bunch of other things that usually come along with websites. We've got the FAQs and all that. You can subscribe to our email, leave your feedback. Yeah. So that's Climate Insight in a nutshell. I will maybe stop sharing for a moment, but I'm going to keep the site up here and see if there's anything specific that, or generally, the attendees would like to discuss or ask, and if there's any specific projects or anything that people want to walk through, I'm happy to do that in the last 20 minutes or so.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Josh. That was really interesting. That's like one heck of a resource center. There seems to be a lot of information in there.
There is, yeah.
I'm going like we've already got quite a few questions, and I have some of my own, and actually that were also raised by some people. But before we do that, I was wondering, would you mind bringing up the slide of your presentation where you had the contact information or the QR code, just in case people missed it and want to find a way? I know presumably a colleague of yours is adding some of the stuff in the chat, but
yeah, it looks like Sherry is in here as well. So it looks like the feedback is in the chat. But yes, I can reshare that one. And there. Share. Okay.
yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, Josh, first question for you, and this one popped up for me as well on the mapping slides. I don't know what the social vulnerability index is or what's included in it, and we had a couple other questions about that. I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit on it.
Sure. So the first suggestion will be to have a look at the data sources and methodologies page. So we do have that explanation on the site, but very happy to dive into it more, because it seems like there are a lot of different methodologies out there for developing social vulnerability indices. But what we have done for the moment, because the data is available, is we are using the Canadian Index of Multiple Deprivations that is developed by Statistics Canada. So it's based on the 2021 census. They include, I think it's about 26 indicators that are derived from the census data points, roll those up into 4 pillars, and then average those pillars out to a score for the CIMD, which we have used as our social vulnerability index layer. It's been normalized on a 1 to 5 scale just to present in an understandable way on that 1 to 5, kind of help with the colors. But yeah, at the moment it is referencing the CIMD from Stats Canada, and there's links and whatnot on the data sources site for that. So one of the enhancements that's being made in the next release is we're breaking that out a little bit into its component pillars. So there will be some additional ways to explore social vulnerability on the map. Great question.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I'll look into that. That's interesting. Okay, a couple questions somewhat related. I think you kind of addressed one of them was about how like the kind of geographic coverage of the data, and it does look like it's available outside of BC for sure. But just curious, overall, can you speak a little bit to the data coverage across the country? Are there particular regions maybe that don't have as much data, or did you struggle to find publicly available data? And if so, is there a way for people to either contribute or bring data sets to you or something like that?
Yes. So a couple of questions there. I'm going to start with the data contribution one first. The social vulnerability data is from Statistics Canada. So we are just accessing that. No way for users to bring us additional data there. You just have to, do the normal thing, answer the census. The infrastructure data is also from Statistics Canada, the open database for infrastructure. So there are gaps in that data set, and not to mean that the infrastructure does not exist, because certainly it does. There are many communities that don't have information on the infrastructure layers just because it has not been submitted to that open database for infrastructure initiative. So while we do not have a way to support that, I would encourage everybody, if you see gaps, to submit your infrastructure information to that. They've renamed it now, LODE, and I can't remember it's basically, it's Government of Canada Open Database, Open Data Initiatives. Climate data is sourced from climatedata.ca. So again, that is a publicly available data set. We don't have control over it, but we do choose which data sources we pull from. And as I said, we've chosen the SSP 5-8.5 50th percentile just to represent a worst case scenario for the climate hazard proxies on the map, but very much encourage users, if you use a different climate scenario or have, or are doing a risk assessment, very much encourage you to check out climatedata.ca for more information on those hazards. We didn't answer this. So yes, there are gaps as well in the social vulnerability index based on StatsCan data availability. So they have certain limitations. They can't publish data if there are fewer than 40 respondents in a dissemination area, or if there was less than 50% response rate. So they've got some of the dissemination areas that have smaller populations do not have data, and unfortunately, that seems to be the case in the territories. So there is very little to no StatsCan data in the territories at the moment, a gap that we're trying to figure out how to address.
Yeah, well, that sounds like that could be quite tricky.
Yeah, publicly available information.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so next question, I'm going to try to combine two questions as well as one of my own, and that's with the forward-looking features in the map. What things change when you change the time period? Is it mainly I know you showed us an example of the heating degree days or something similar to that.
Yeah.
But does the mapping tool include any modeling or something to also adjust what the social vulnerability index might look based on that information, or what the infrastructure might look like based on like community growth or something like that?
The short answer is no. So the climate data is what changes as you project forward. We're just pulling data for the map. We aren't doing any kind of major calculations on what that would look like in the future. And that would be a pretty incredible research project to understand how social vulnerability would change in changing climate based on this hazard or this level of change by this year. So no, it's just the climate data that projects forward. The social vulnerability data is static for the 2021 census, and the infrastructure data is static as well from I'd have to look at the site here, climate data, the equity infrastructure data. The ODI that we're using was sourced between November 2022 and March 2023. So that's the data as it is there. They have updated the open database for infrastructure has been updated. So we are going to continue to change and keep that recent as StatsCan updates their data, but yeah, that's where it is at the moment. Another good question. See, we've got some data folks on the call today, so lots of good questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Josh. Okay, we've got a question here on the model used to generate the weather projection data.
Okay.
That's the question. What model?
Oh, yeah. I see. I'm going to get the acronym wrong. CIMP6. I hope that's answering the question. That's, check out climatedata.ca for more information about that. Yeah. That's a quick answer to that question.
Yeah. It sounds like there's lots to be learned by perusing the documentation and the sources.
Yep.
Question for you. I think you covered a little bit in your introduction in the presentation, but walk me through who is the primary audiences for this tool. What do you?
So I guess our project target is for community practitioners, so municipalities, local governments, First Nations communities, and those that support them, like consultants, for communities between 5,000 and 500,000 population. I think that's it's a pretty broad range, and there is lots of capacity in communities that are in the 3, 4, 500,000 range. So it's really, I think, to target the communities that have, practitioners that don't have enough capacity within their community to make climate resilient or climate smart infrastructure decisions. So the infrastructure practitioner is maybe one engineer in a smaller community that doesn't have the support of a climate team, but knows it's important and wants to start making those considerations in their infrastructure projects. Or the environmental services supervisor, whatever you'd like to call them, that has climate as one of the many things on their plate, that doesn't always have the time or the resources to get the information in front of those infrastructure decision makers. Or communities that just don't have anybody working on this stuff, and maybe someone in the planning and development department thinks it's important and wants to start again considering those things. So definitely targeted for our local communities. And yeah, so local, regional, First Nations governments, and I think those staff or practitioners that know it's important, know climate action and climate resilient infrastructure is important, but may not have the capacity to do that on a day-to-day.
Okay, great. It occurred to me because it seemed like it could also be like an individual homeowner or something, right? Because if you went through like that one channel you demonstrated where,
Yep.
am I doing a big retrofit or a deep or light retrofit or something like that?
Yes, but I guess the solutions that you would come out with, the infrastructure options are more geared towards community infrastructure, as buildings and public housing, as opposed to single family or small MURBs. There wouldn't be maybe as many targeted solutions for those things. Yeah, some of the solutions to hazards, there's solutions in there for wildfire that relate to Fire Smart Canada zonal management around your property. There's things that relate to on-site rainwater management to reduce flood risk that could be scaled down. Small rain gardens or rain barrels could be scaled down to an individual homeowner. So yeah, you may not find quite as many resources as a tool that's targeted for like single family homes, but if someone's ambitious, they could scale down some of those solutions to meet the needs on their property for sure.
Okay, great. Speaking of buildings, actually, it's another question about I guess, the infrastructure data, and probably the answer is to look at the data sources, but I'm going to ask it anyhow.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, so it's about the data, and I guess the data and the tools that you have for like conveying the building stock, and specifically like energy use or thermal resilience of the building stock. Presumably this is in the map.
No, that is not information that we have on the site at the moment. The list of infrastructure that we have at the moment, again, back to that theme about communities. So there's mostly what you would think of as municipal or community infrastructure. So the pedestrian and cycling networks as a way to target public transportation or alternative modes, bridges and tunnels from a risk perspective, potable water, wastewater, stormwater, public transit, and solid waste. There are a few other infrastructure layers that are coming with the next release in April that focus more on community buildings. But again, we're accessing publicly available data and presenting it in one place. So there's not a lot of that analysis that may happen with a more thorough review. I know lots of communities do that hazard profile or emissions profile per building in their community based on some GIS information, but we're not doing those calculations on here at the moment. Hopefully that answered all of the question.
Yeah, I think so. Also, your colleague Sherry is really doing a great job answering a lot of questions in the Q&A as well.
Great.
So
Yeah.
I'm running low. I'm hoping
Yeah.
that people are, yeah, it seems like it seems like she's answering a lot of the questions.
Good. Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, glad to have some backup.
What else can I, yeah, she's really answered most of them. Yeah,
Well,
okay,
Sherry, are
so
there any? Oh, okay. Go
well,
ahead,
maybe
James.
I've got one that build or that kind of derives from one of the questions asked here. Okay, so in the map, the thing that the primary kind of layer that changes over time is the climate data, which you pull from climatedata.ca. Is that right?
That's right.
And most of the other data sources are publicly available with, albeit spotty, but national coverage. So Statistics Canada data, right?
Yep.
But I think you touched on this that like certain jurisdictions are doing various different, might be doing like their own kind of regional analyses of like future flood risk, how things might change. Is there any plan to incorporate that kind of data in the regions where that data is available in the future?
At the moment, no. We're trying to make the resource accessible and usable and equitable for everybody. So I think if we start presenting that information, you're probably quickly going to see the communities that don't have capacity to do that type of thing. There are some national maps that are available from a hazard perspective. There's going to be links to those coming, but there is the Canadian Wildfire Service, Wildfire Information Service, produces maps about wildfire hazard. ClimateData.ca has also taken that information and incorporated some of their changing climate data to project wildfire hazard forward into the future. Someone just pointed out to me that there is a database of communities that have prepared and publicized their community floodplain maps. And there is like a permafrost atlas, I guess, that just shows the current extent and type of permafrost throughout Canada. So we're focused on national data at the moment. But yeah, if users have that type of information on their side and have a GIS system, feel free to take our methodology and start plugging in those things and overlay it with your additional info to help with whatever sort of decision support you're looking for.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Josh. That brings us actually to 1 minute over time, and I think we've addressed most of the questions through some combination of yourself and Sherry. So hopefully
Great.
everybody is well informed now. I think it's a really interesting resource center. I'm looking forward to getting the chance to play around with it and learn a little bit more about the data sources and methodology. So I really appreciate the presentation, Josh. Just as a reminder to everybody that is in attendance today, these discovery sessions are recorded and made available, I think, via our website or via YouTube or something like that. I actually don't know where we make them available, but they are available. And if you want to know, you can always reach out to us to find out where they are. And with that, I will just say thanks again, Josh. We really appreciate it. And everybody have a good Friday afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.